Welcome to this Royal Television Society Thames Valley webinar, Television Advertising Then and Now. And here to introduce it, the Centre's Deputy Chair, Stephen Stewart.
At Thames Valley, it's our mission to explore creative technology and particularly promote a conversation between the creative and technology communities. So tonight it's quite fitting that the subject is advertising, as that really does sit firmly at the boundary where creativity does meet technology. Love them or hate them, television adverts have been part of our viewing life here in the UK since the 22nd of September in 1955 with the launch of ITV. The first ever advert was more like a public information film and was for Gibbs SR toothpaste. 15 years later, Bird's Eye paid the princely sum of £23 to advertise peas in colour for the first time. Vauxhall was the first brand on Channel 4, and Chanel No. 5, appropriately enough, was the Channel 5's first ad in 1997. By then, there were hundreds of TV channels, as well as the emergence of this internet thing, which, as we now know, was to change the way viewers consume programmes and advertising for good. So this evening, we've brought together a panel of experts that are going to take us on a journey through advertising history and how linear television advertising actually makes it to our screens today. A look at how the boundaries between linear and non-linear or VOD are becoming blurred. The disruptive influence that social media platforms are having on their more established rivals. And how Hollywood technology is being used to create a whole new set of opportunities for advertisers that we, the viewers, might not even be aware of. Finally, we'll get the view of an industry veteran who spent 20 years at the very top of the advertising industry, advising brands and government on how to navigate this world of seemingly endless choice of where to invest their money for the best return. So please welcome David Joel, Head of Commercial at Clearcast, Justin Gupta, Head of Broadcast Partnerships in the UK and Ireland at Google, Nikita Panchal, Marketing Director at Bubble Agency, Dr. Philip McLaughlin, Chief Scientist at Myriad, and Peter Kemp, a Media Strategist. So, without further ado, David, over to you.
In terms of the history, I think there are some key points. As Stephen said, 55 ITV started. That's where it all kicked off. 1964 was where the watershed came in. And the watershed was the first point of regulation. So suddenly advertising needed to adapt to that, and it's never changed since then. As we're moving forward, there's lots of new things, but they are all old things coming back round again in a certain way. As Stephen said there, Channel 4 launched in 1983. 1985, Nick Kamen. Now, the Nick Kamen, as we know, just died recently, was the lead actor in the Levi's ad. Listening to John Hegarty on the radio when he was talking about how that ad was made, the clearance and making that commercial fit for air was quite a strange thing to do. They wanted a man to walk into the laundrette and take his clothes off. Interestingly, the regulator, who is not Clearcast, would have banned that ad for taking his clothes off. The equivalent of Clearcast, who do interpretation of the BCAP codes, said change his boxer shorts, change his Y fronts to boxer shorts, and they did that, and it was cleared, and it was absolutely fine. And that hasn't changed now throughout the supply chain of television. 1989, Sky came along, 4 channels at Sky. 1993, Maggie's Revenge, when she cleared out the ITV regional channels, Thames Television disappeared, and Breakfast Television launched then. 2003, ITV eventually came together into one solid lump, which is why that's quite interesting in the advertising landscape now, because you've now got a big linear section, and now we've got the emerging, what we used to call the emerging markets of the online and the VOD, which are now coming together. 2005 was YouTube, and then 2007 was Clearcast. So let me explain to you a little bit about who Clearcast are. We are not the regulator. We are not the people that decide the rules on ads. We protect those. We protect our shareholders, who are ITV, Sky, Channel 4, and Warners, who are there to provide a service to the advertising industry to ensure the ad gets perfectly through to air on time at the right time, but is regulated within the codes. We protect the licenses, but then the important thing is that we support the advertising industry to make sure they can make the ads right, so that they don't waste lots of time in iterative processes making commercials that won't be cleared. So we make sure that they adhere to that. We're a very similar setup to if you're in the industry and you know about Barb, funded by the licensing by the broadcasters in order to support the whole of the advertising service. Just a few pointers on the volumes of commercials that come through. At Clearcast, we saw last year over 50,000 films in order to make sure they were suitable. We saw over 40,000 scripts without films. We have 5,000 users on our systems, uploading, downloading, making sure content's coming in and making sure that we can review that and that can be prepared. And then eventually that turned into, on the channels that we support, 33,000 commercials going to air. This doesn't count into and as Justin will talk and Peter will be talking about other platforms where they're doing other ads as well. So you can see the volume that comes through here. As I say, lots has changed, but in the main, nothing has changed. You have to do it on time, you have to do it quickly, and you have to do it to the right standards. And all of these are disciplines that we have to, as an industry, embrace to make sure that we can get that supply chain moving as quickly as possible. It's interesting to think about last year in isolation, and once again from our Clearcast lens, and probably from everybody's lens when COVID landed. Not only operationally did it make it tricky working remotely and making sure that the technology supported that, but then from a clearance perspective, there was a whole load of new things to consider when making this right. You know, we had commercials being pulled, we had new commercials coming to air, we had four different nations in doing 4 different policies, making that different. We had to defend to Domestos that just because the president said it doesn't make it right. So they weren't allowed to clear that to air. But you can see how that complexity and speed was required. Boris Johnson was making his mind up at 10 o'clock at night what he was going to do the next day, and the commercial had to be cleared on air. So we had copies sitting there ready to be cleared and being uploaded all the time. So it's a 24/7 operation within that. We now clear for 300 channels for our services, which to me, I just go, wow, that's just mind something. When we talk about those earlier stats, you know, Channel 4 coming on in 1983, that made 2 commercial channels, and now we're into the myriad of all these others. And I think, you know, my colleagues here on the panel here are going to talk more to around that. But from our perspective as well now, that where the linear ad publishers are wrestling with how they now wrestle with BVOD. And BVOD, for those that don't know, is broadcasting VOD. If you're in the world of VOD, video on demand, TVOD, transactional video on demand, PVOD, premier video on demand. BVOD is when you're watching ITV online. And now they're needing to adapt to that and adapt their processes and supply chain on all levels, from booking airtime from an advertiser perspective, all the way through to reporting the audience figures on the other end. And the sales houses and it's important to think about the sales houses because it's not just the broadcasters, are becoming more and more creative in that. I'm sure we're going to be talking about addressable advertising later, where it's one-to-one knowledge. Sky do this very, very well now. What that does in the supply chain is it's added real complexity, because we are now finding lots of very small advertisers having the ability to advertise on linear TV. And that requires them to be able to adapt their thinking and understanding the codes and understanding the standards in order to be able to do that. And we have to, as an industry, make sure that everybody's trained properly in those areas in order to get that supply chain really moving fast. I think it's worth understanding that the key challenges here now, as I see them and as we look for them going forward, is we need to get some more standards. The legacy of the different platforms now is now making it trickier for advertisers to get to air. And I think we've got to find some ways to enhance that. We need to, similar to the content marketplace, we need to find some standards around metadata. Metadata is really tricky to do. And for those that don't know what metadata is, it's all the information about everything, who's in a commercial, what the music is, how long it runs, all of those things, because those could be reusable and trackable through the supply chain as commercials can be reused. So we need to make sure that, because we need to make sure that it can be reported, and more importantly, from the publisher's perspective, it can be billed, because it's just as tricky to get these things billed as it is to get them to air. I think the other area that is very key that we need to be looking at, certainly in this converging world, is around regulation. We have two sets of codes. We have the BCAP code for linear, and we have the CAP code for online. I think there's going to be increasing pressure on the online to come into line with the BCAP code, but then the BCAP code wants some relaxation in order to come down to the CAP codes. So somewhere we need to be mindful of how we make sure that we don't get over-regulated. The Queen's speech last week talked about some, what I would class, very draconian rules around high fat, salt and sugar not being allowed on online, and then you can advertise it on post 9 o'clock only. If we start to be regulated, overly regulated, it will make it very hard for advertisers to do what we are all trying to do, which is connect brands to viewers. And that's all we're trying to do in its simplest form, is connect these brands to viewers. So lots of challenges. There is a lot of complexity. We could have spent hours talking about, you know, the nuances of formats and profiles and everything else that goes with it. But we need to make sure that we can make this as simple and as streamlined as possible.
It's fascinating, a real eye-opener into just how much goes on behind the scenes, and as you say, making sure that the right ads get the right clearances and end up on the right channels in front of the right audience. So anyway, moving on. Now, if you thought that was complicated, imagine what life would be like if you had to do all of that in real time. And that's the world that Justin from Google is going to give us a glimpse into.
Okay, thanks, Stephen. So I'm Justin Gupta. I'm Head of Broadcast Partnerships for UK and Ireland at Google. I've been working in broadcasting and advertising for 20 years, and I was previously at YouTube and BBC Interactive, where I worked on the red button. And I've always been fascinated about shifts in TV distribution and technology. And I want to give you a flavour today of how the pandemic has accelerated some of these shifts and some of the new digital opportunities that that's creating. But first of all, I want you to reflect on how your TV viewing behaviour has changed in the last year. So 2020 was a remarkable year for broadcasting. What we watch, how we watch, and where we watch TV has fundamentally changed. So think again about you and your family. You're not atypical. And looking at the data, I believe we've jumped ahead 3 to 5 years in terms of digital adoption. What's changed in 2020? So Ender's analysis estimated the evolution of viewing by content type in the UK, and viewing was up overall, but digitally enabled viewing was up significantly. So subscription VODs were up 48%, online video was up 32%, and Netflix now have 200 million subscribers globally, and Disney Plus are already over 100 million less than 18 months after they launched. And this similar trend is being observed in all countries. Everyone has closed the digital adoption gap. They've had more time at home and are much more digitally savvy. And Samsung shared that on their smart TVs, 56% of viewing time in the UK was spent streaming during 2020. So on Samsung, at least, they have already passed the digital tipping point. So the question is, will this shift endure? And if we look backwards, total viewing has remained remarkably consistent, notwithstanding the recent pandemic. All non-live viewing has been growing and taking an increasing share from live viewing, but the jump from 2019 to 2020 is really stark. The adoption gap has been closed. And if we look forwards, total viewing is expected to return to a normal level in 2022. However, SVOD, online and catch-up are expected to stay at these new levels for the next 3 to 5 years, with live viewing expected to continue to decrease. Now, this is all viewers. How uniform is this across age groups? And it's worth noting we now have a digital generation who are much more accustomed to on-demand content. And Thingsbox shared how this breaks down for traditional broadcaster content specifically. And we now have a hard-to-reach 16 to 34 age group who watch nearly half of broadcaster content via streaming or catch-up. However, they're only watching about half as much of traditional TV. And it's worth noting that all age groups have now adopted streaming. My 82-year-old father is now regularly advising me to watch shows on ITV Hub or other catch-up services. And this is definitely a new behaviour since the pandemic. We know a consumer shift has happened. We're living 3 to 5 years in the future, and an increasing amount of TV is delivered over the internet. how does this impact your overall ad strategy, and what other implications are there for broadcasters? But firstly, what's in it for the viewer? So viewers want personalized content and ads that are relevant to them in the same way that they're used to on digital platforms. And it's been showed that 3 times as much attention is paid to ads that are relevant to me versus the average. And the personalization we're talking about here is addressable TV advertising, where you can serve different ads to different viewers, different versions of the same ad, or sell your TV ad space in a much more granular way, bringing new advertisers to TV or helping advertisers meet their goals. And it's worth noting here that all the things that are already great about TV advertising will continue to be true. It's just that addressable creates new capabilities to personalize advertising. So how do we do it? Let's first answer the question, how much of the viewing is happening via digital? So in this chart, digital distribution is above the line and linear distribution is below the line. So SVOD and online video are, as you expect, 100% digitally distributed. However, both catch up and live are now a significant chunk of digitally enabled viewing. And this has a few implications. So firstly, fragmentation. It's really challenging for a broadcaster to be everywhere. It's a numbers game. You need to go where the viewers are, especially those hard to reach 16 to 34s. Now, for advertising, for digitally distributed content, it's now possible to personalize TV ads, bringing this new capability to broadcasters. And in fact, most set-top boxes and TVs are internet connected these days, which brings further possibility to customize your ads. So if the last slide was the pessimistic view, then think of this slide as the optimistic view. This looks at how much viewing on ad-supported services can be digitally enabled. So if we take the BBC, which shows no ads, and the pure subscription VOD services out of the picture, now we're looking specifically at what technologies can allow us to create personalized addressable advertising using digital methods. And there are broadly 4 ways that you can do it. So first is client-side ad insertion. So this is typically how it's done with pure digital video on demand or catch-up services. The second one is server-side dynamic ad insertion, or DAI, and this is the best solution for live streaming. The third is set-top box-based or TV-based ad insertion, where the ads are replaced with more relevant ads in the box. So Sky Ad Smart on Sky or Virgin is a great example, or within specific brands on TV sets, such as Samsung Ads. And the fourth one is HBB TV ad replacement, where your TV can switch from broadcast to broadband in order to personalize the ads. This is most relevant with terrestrial TV in the UK, but it's also popular in Germany and Italy, where they use it to show graphical ads on the screen on top of existing ads or programming. And this diagram gives you a flavor of how the broadcaster of the future will consider their different pools of advertising and the mosaic of tech that they'll need to capture this opportunity. So I want to give one insight where broadcasters are currently capturing digital in live sports, and also dig deeper into this linear ad replacement opportunity with HBB TV. We've seen success with both traditional and digital first sports broadcaster using dynamic ad insertion to monetize high-scale live events for their streaming services. And we've seen a huge uptick in live streaming as more sports events are being streamed globally. And this is allowing traditional broadcasters to add a digital proposition to their live sports events alongside their linear advertising. And viewers who are streaming content on their devices can see different ads tailored to them. Now, providing digital advertising to connected TV viewers at scale is a challenge we've now overcome. And Google Ad Manager's DAI has already delivered relevant ads to more than 1 million concurrent live stream viewers at the same time, for example, during last year's UEFA Champions League final. And we recently announced that we're working with DAZN, the sports broadcaster, to activate dynamic ad insertion starting in Germany. And as a digital first broadcaster, DAZN are demonstrating how the broadcaster of the future can go to market with a fully addressable solution, which is particularly compelling to buyers due to the high volume of viewers using connected TV. Another area broadcasters are exploring is ad replacement in linear TV in order to unlock this nascent advertising opportunity with HBB TV. So HBB TV stands for Hybrid Broadcast Broadband TV, and it's an interactive TV technology which is supported by most modern smart TVs sold in Europe. And in the UK, it powers the BBC's Red Button services on Freeview, and there are about 8 million TVs which can do it. Now, this demo, which we developed with our partner Synapse TV and showed at the International Broadcaster Convention in Amsterdam, shows HBB TV ads substitution in action. So you see one TV on the left showing ads from the linear broadcast, with the TVs in the middle and on the right getting customized ads over the internet based on the user's location and viewing behavior. Now, to handle the switch between broadcast and broadband, there's a short landing zone, okay? Now the landing zone is essentially a slide which is put over the screen, we just saw it there, and this essentially now means that the TV in the right and in the middle are now having their content streamed over the internet. And think of the landing zone like the curtain coming down at the theatre. Once the scenery is changed behind the scene, the curtain comes back up, and if the TV is connected to the internet, the viewer is switched to the internet stream. And there are efforts underway to improve the HBB TV specification to reduce the need for workarounds like landing zones. And there's a group which Google is part of called the HBB TV Targeted Advertising Working Group, which is working across the ecosystem to deliver a frame-accurate ad solution in HBB. And it's worth noting that it will take time for TV manufacturers to update any standards. And some of this work involves the capability to prefetch ads or part of the ad pod in memory, so that you can get a fast switch and playback. So we're just seeing John Legend finish here, and we should be able to see the landing zone at the end of the break. Here it is. And now we're back in broadcast. And we're currently piloting this approach with a few broadcasters in Europe. So I hope that gives you a flavour of development in addressable video and TV advertising and this mosaic of solution that the broadcaster of the future will need to use. And feel free to email me if you have any questions about any of the above.
So thanks, Justin. Of course, it's not just the big screen that viewers and the brands want to connect with. They want to be able to connect with the hard-to-reach younger audiences, because they probably spend as much time on their mobile devices as they do watching the big screen, and often simultaneously interacting both on various social media platforms and watching TV. So targeting this valuable group is complex as well, yet key for the brands, as Nikita from Bubble Agency is going to explain to us now. Nikita.
So to be honest, it's quite a tricky and complex subject to sum up in just a few minutes. But when we're talking about micro targeting, we cannot ignore the, how social media plays a part in that. So firstly, looking at micro targeting, what is it? It's the ability to be able to successfully create personalized messages and offers and deliver that directly to individuals through what we call targeting, segmentation, and positioning. So with social media, you've got the ability to micro target and flexibly combine certain demographics in order to reach a target audience that has never, in a way that wasn't possible 5 years ago, 10 years ago, or definitely beyond. So when we're talking about flexibly combining particular components, the way that social media works is that you can actually dive into people's lives in terms of where they live, their age, what they're interested in, what they like, what they don't like. You can dive down into their religion, their relationship status, their purchasing behavior, and much, much more. And that allows people that are advertising to really tailor their adverts to their target audience in order to be able to achieve a much better return on investment than a lot of other methods of advertising that exist on the market today. So with social media advertising, it authenticates the way that a promoted advert is sent and received. And the true power of social media actually lies in the information that it provides. So millions of users give away thousands of valuable insights every single day, every single hour. And all of this information is being collected and used by people who are advertising to be able to really set the right message to the right people at the right time, especially when we're looking at the consumer journey. So the role of social media in users' daily lives has changed dramatically. It carries significant weight in its purchase. So TV is great for discovery, but social media really plays a part in the research phase. So when we're looking at the ADA process, which is creating attention, interest, desire, and action, social media plays a huge part in that process. And in the research process in particular, it comes second to that of search engines. And the question is, how do they do that? So when we look at the giants like Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, and YouTube, lots of businesses put a huge emphasis on paid advertising as part of their marketing strategy, because they're able to target people, in ways that weren't possible before. And that actually applies globally. You've got, the ones that I've just named are the social media platforms that are most commonly known to everybody. But there's certain social media platforms that exist in certain countries. Like if you look at China, for example, they've got QQ, which isn't available in other parts of the world. But paying for social media allows you to amplify your reach, enhance your targeting, and drive greater results. Now, if I just take LinkedIn as an example, you're able to specifically advertise to people based on their job titles, what they're interested in, what groups they're a part of, and you wouldn't be able to advertise like that using other methods. Facebook alone, you've got 2 billion monthly users, which is a huge figure. And what you can achieve through advertising on social media and platforms like Facebook will completely blow your mind in terms of its capabilities and what you're able to actually achieve. So I think for businesses that are looking for different ways to advertise, the social media landscape plays a huge part in that kind of ecosystem today.
That's great. Thanks, Nikita. That's fascinating. Again, completely different part of the industry that most people probably aren't aware how complex it is. And certainly now I'll know that those spookily relevant ads on social media are never just really an amazing coincidence, as I used to think they were. So thanks for that. Moving on, so far this evening, whatever platforms we've been discussing, all the messages have been deliberately scheduled or inserted prominently to actually interrupt the program surrounding them or divert our attention from the adjacent content. So our next panelist is going to talk about non-interruptive advertising, where the advertising is actually included within the program editorial. The challenge, of course, with traditional product placement is that the product had to be physically present when the film was being made or the show was being shot. And once it was there forever. So that has now changed, thanks to some clever tech that Dr. Philip from Myriad is now going to explain.
The best way to show what we do is to show a video. So thanks for the really nice summaries we've had from David and Nikita and Justin on the trends in advertising. This is more talk about a specific kind of advertising, a new format, digital product placement or in-content advertising. And you can see this is what we do. This is a very recent campaign we did in France for TF1 and the show Demain nous appartient. Apologies for my appalling pronunciation. And you can see that we are placing, just like the old style product placement, we are placing digital products into this show. And I've seen an actual product placed, and we also do a lot of signage placements. So these are the main two kinds of placements we make. And you can imagine the kinds of issues involved in doing this. And I'm going to go into some detail as much as I can in the time as to how this is done. And you can see here there's just empty space on a road, which we can identify as an opportunity for a placement. So, kind of what the kind of solutions that advantages of this approach. First of all, we can reach viewers in a way that people couldn't reach before, placing the ads into the content. We have evidence that it's the format that the consumers like, and I've got a slide showing that. It's unskippable, so this kind of ads cannot be blocked, just technically not possible. And again, we have lots of research saying that attention to the ads, if they're done well, is quite high. From the viewer's point of view, it's very good that the ads don't disrupt. So no breaks in the content in this format. And we've got evidence also that you can achieve your targets, your KPIs very easily with this format. So in terms of our partners, I won't go over these very much, but you can basically it's the kind of companies that you'd expect us to partner with. These are the broadcasters that we partner with, and we have 3 main regions: America, Europe, and Asia. Now, in terms of how well it works, obviously we spend quite a lot of effort in talking to different companies, trying to get some verification of what we do. So we have verification from Comscore and from Nielsen measurement companies who have verified that our ads come up to their criteria. Now, now I'm going to talk a bit about my area, because I'm the chief scientist of the company, and my area is technical. So this is now getting into my zone, if you like, and this is our solution for solving this problem of relating the content to the brands. So how do we because we get this huge amount of content going through our pipeline, how can we make sure that the right content goes to the right brand? So this is what we do is we do some automatic computer vision processing. So on the left, you'll see 4 kinds of processing that we do. So top left, brand opportunities. So we would scan the content for places which look like places where we placed brands before. So we have our own neural network based on our own data, because we've been doing this for several years. So we can then train a neural network to find the places that are similar to places that we placed brands before. And this is the blue zones marked on the image. We also apply more things which are probably more familiar, people who know about the AI computer vision methods. So object recognition, we can pull out, that's top right, we can pull out people and objects like motorcycles, cars. We can identify face emotion in the content. So by recognizing the faces and then looking at those faces and trying to work out what emotion they're portraying. And then the 4th thing we can do is look at locale, which is telling us what kind of environment are we in this content. And all these things together with other data that we could add. This is a kind of a work in progress project. We can build up a very rich set of metadata about the content. But then the question is, how do you use that metadata to relate it to the brand? So that's on the right now, where we have a workflow where we take the metadata, we take the brand profile, and then we have a search engine where a user, which could be a brand, it could be one of our own staff, would enter a search term to then find the content matching that particular search query. We need to have a language interpreter which takes the query and reinterprets it in terms of our own labels. But from that, you can then get the matching content. And this is just a very simple example where today preparing for this, I entered in our search engine object table. So finding tables in the scenes, and looking for kitchen as locale. So a combination of those search terms produce this list. This is content from Univision, one of our partners, Venture El Miedo. It's a Mexican show. And this returned these scenes, which I think you can all agree are fairly relevant to the search. And this really allows us to very quickly and very flexibly find content relevant to a brand. You imagine this would be relevant to, for instance, a food and drink brand who breakfast-related products, fruit juice. So you can essentially work out from the brand, try to, and you can experiment with this because it's so fast. You can change the way you search very quickly and return a whole new set of content until you find what you want. Another piece of technology I want to talk about, which actually this is the last piece, is the dynamic server-side ad integration, which Justin's already talked about. And this is that technology, but applied to in-content ads. So it's the same kind of technology, but for our format. And there are particular flavors. There are particular things which need to be done to make it work. So here the idea is that you have multiple brands. So again, this is designed for addressable personalized ads. So you would have different brands prepared for the same content, ready to be played out. And then for each viewer, you decide which version of the content you want to be sent to that viewer. So, and it is designed to work with industry standard playout systems, so we don't need to reinvent the wheel in terms of how to play the content out. And last point, allows brands to be updated to remain relevant. So for instance, you can have this, you can replace last year's iPhone with this year's iPhone, if that's what you want to do. And on the right, there's a little diagram showing how it works. That's taken from one of our patent documents. But yeah, if anybody wants to know a bit more about that, I'm happy to help.
That's fascinating. Thanks ever so much for that. So all of those forms of advertising clearly have a valuable part to play in helping the brands reach their target audience at the right time for the right price. But just how do they choose the right platform? How do they make their mind up? There's a plethora of choice there. And how do they get their message to hit home? Well, that's where Peter comes in. So Peter, over to you.
So yes, wow. So if you look at all of these technologies, I think the first thing to think about, and I've been in the industry for over 20 years, is that it brings positives. It brings new revenue into the market. It keeps audiences entertained. It makes their ad viewing experience have less friction, more relevance. So it's all positive, but it does make the agency world much harder. Now, before I go into what I mean when I say agency, I don't know who's watching this specifically. So I'm going to kind of try and keep it as simple as possible. In our sector, you have creative agencies and media agencies. And simplistically, creative agencies make the ads, media agencies put it in the spaces that make sense. But I think it's quite important to go through how we've got to the agency structure we've got today. So I'm going to do essentially 70 years in 70 seconds of the agency history. And then I'm going to talk about how TV advertising is actually bought today, which obviously falls out of that legacy of the last 70 years, and then touch on the viewer at the end. So the first thing, let's talk about the age of the brand. Now, there are loads of arguments about where the first brand came from. I've seen people cite Ephesus as an ancient city that shows evidence of brand marketing, but for the purpose of this document, I'm going to be talking about Thai Fu and using that as the first case. So the story goes is that tea was imported from China and it got tampered with. And what Thai Fu did, they were the first ones to actually seal it in a packaging. So for when people went out to buy tea, they actually wanted Thai Fu specifically because there was something about that brand that made sense to them and gave more trust rather than the retailer, for instance. So brands started coming out more and more, packaging, etc., etc. And of course, I think we started at the beginning of this around the 1950s when ITV first launched. In America, 1950 was when P&G first started sponsoring and funding daytime dramas, and that's where the term the soap opera came from. And of course, the copy back then in the 50s was very much product orientated. It was about USPs, product truths. It could wash whiter, it could do it quicker, it could do it cheaper, etc., etc. But what they found was, as brand marketing certainly got onto TV advertising, depending on who was communicating the message and how they were communicating it, consumers were taking out different aspects of that product or brand that perhaps weren't anything to do with the product. They may have felt more trustworthy in it, may have felt more premium, etc., etc. And actually, this wasn't the role of media owners and broadcast. They didn't want to get involved in that. So essentially, we moved into the age of the agency. And in the agency, in the kind of early 60s, up until the sort of late 70s, we had creative and media people, people who made the ads and media people who placed them together. And they were tasked to come up with the messaging, but also to find the right place to put it. Now, as channels grew, and there were more than just TV channels, more radio stations, outdoor placements, more channels in each of those, it became more and more complicated. So what happened next is that media broke away from creative, and media owners essentially paid media agencies to do their work for them, and gave them a 15% commission. What that means is that as an agency, as a media agency, if I want to go and spend £100 with a media owner, it costs me 85p. And that 15% difference is what allows us to fund ourselves. And some of it's passed back to the clients. So that work's gone on. Media agency's role really is about finding, peculiaring that space, but also offering the right advice and reasons and impartiality to that. But as brands grew, they wanted more for less, which makes sense. In any market that grows sees consolidation. And this is where we sit today. So these are the big six. And to think of some brands that you guys watching this might know about. So Group M is WPP. Omnicom hold Adam and Eve, make ads like John Lewis. Publicis is the home of Saatchi's. McCann sits in IPG. So these are all big global brands. But essentially, the industry clusters around these sort of big six. And those are the ones deploying linear TV advertising and also the digital versions of it as well. But the way the media industry started was through the media buying pool. Now, what this means is that linear TV is judged in this way. So essentially, there's a station average price. And if you're a big spender, you can enjoy lower prices. And if you're a small spender, you pay more. And the market is sort of clustered around that. And it does tend to sit in the linear space. Now, as less and less money is proportionally going into linear, digital advertising isn't judged in this way when it comes to digital video, because you can't create pools, because you have dynamic pricing, and there's no whole myriad of problems that come with that. But nonetheless, that is still how TV is traded and judged in today's market. And of course, that means everything becomes about being below the pool, and that tends to be the direction of flow and attention. And of course, while that was going on, so 40 years ago, the media planner and the TV buyer's job was relatively, compared to today, simple. You could buy a spot in Coronation Street and reach 21 million viewers. And so it was easier to do, let's be honest about it. Look at this today. So the Christmas episode from last year attracted 5 million viewers. Now that's a big audience, 5 million viewers, but you can see what's happened. Now, without understanding what's going on behind this, you might think, well, people are just not watching TV anymore. And that's not the case. It's fragmentation. And it's the slide that Justin showed earlier on. And this is another one from Thinkbox, which is obviously a bit partisan, but what they're referring to is the commercial opportunities. And what we can see here is that live TV, TV playback, and broadcaster VOD, a lot of that's all coming from the same broadcaster. So they're creating ways to capture those audiences that were going elsewhere. But obviously, the real threat to them is the subscription VOD market. And I even saw an ad today from ITV saying ITV Hub Plus, where you can pay for an ad-free environment. So there's loads of challenges in there. But the one thing that isn't on here, and I'm going to steal Justin's chart from Enders, is the online video element. So we can find the TV viewers fragmented. They're in more channels, they're time shifting, they're watching it in catch up, they're watching it through apps on their TV, laptops, Chromecasts, etc. But actually the eyeballs are going a lot of the time outside of that into online video spaces, to a lot of where Nikita's work is pointed at into social media. So there's a real challenge there, no doubt about it. And this is what presents the modern media agency today. Now, this is a chart that people like myself love showing, because it makes it look like it's really complicated. What it really means is that it's a bit of a gold rush. So what you've got here is a number of MarTech companies that range from DSPs, that are obviously demand-side platforms, supply-side platforms, data management platforms. You've got various viewability, brand tracking data. But honestly, that's our problems in the media agency. And that is in particular around the digital video market. So really, how is TV advertising bought today? So let's call it TV advertising, that's what it is. Well, actually, despite the previous slide I've shown you, I've always seen that audio-visual advertising, you can call it that, sort of sees it through 6 separate lenses. Now, it is still predominantly in linear TV. That's where a lot of the investment goes. And from a creative agency side, if I'm being completely honest, ads are made fit for TV. And I'm sure in Nikita's world, many a frustration happens when you see clients try and crowbar a TV ad into social, and you've got to make something that's fit for purpose. The other lens is BVOD, which was mentioned earlier around the fact there's broadcast to VOD. So this is the same content, but obviously being delivered to viewers through different ways, through catch-up, through apps on phones, Chromecast, etc. And then addressable. Now, in the UK market, there are things that Justin's obviously pointed to, and those technologies are going to be really exciting going forwards. But at the moment, AdSmart from Sky is the key product. Now, it used to be called Sky AdSmart because you could only do addressable advertising into Sky homes and Sky channels. They expanded it to the channels that they sell as well, which includes Channel 5. But they've also added Channel 4. So the addressable ads market that Sky are doing at the moment is quite sizable, and there's a real opportunity for clients who want to use it correctly. I personally, and this is my personal view, I think YouTube is a standalone product. I think it's not TV, it's not a website, it's not a social network, it's its own thing. And I'll come on and talk a little bit more about how we have to look at it in that way for certain reasons. I haven't put every single social video opportunity here because in the main, at the moment, the Facebook Insta family is where you go to first of all. It's scalable and they offer quite different audiences and behaviors. And so if I'm being honest, it's the quickest route to market for a lot of advertisers. TikTok's on there because it's trending at the moment, but if I'm honest with you, it's not a commercial opportunity. You can buy ad space on there, but it's more about getting influencers in a non-paid environment to push their content. At the moment, TikTok are in the business of growing their user base, not necessarily monetizing that at this moment in time. And then finally, the programmatic VOD, which is this vast inventory that can be found in what's called exchanges, and different agencies access it through different technologies, which you can't see, but on that particular slide there. So those are the kind of 6 lenses when you're, as a media agency, about how you would make choices. However, each opportunity is judged differently depending on the specialist at hand. So what I mean by that, so TV buyers and traders tend to look at linear and TV and BVOD together. Now they do that for 2 reasons. One, because if you're watching Coronation Street, it's not 5 million viewers, it's probably 7 or 8 million. And the idea is that a good TV planner will have the skills and the tools in-house to be able to plan an overall plan that looks at the reach that you can establish across VOD and linear TV. There's also a trading dynamic because the VOD pricing helps underpin the linear TV pricing, which we mentioned in the pool earlier on. Addressable, created for new to air advertisers. Sky were very smart in understanding that a lot of their spots aren't registered on bar because they do less than 1 rating. And so essentially they're not being able to monetize that. So sweeping up all that distressed inventory and packaging it up to clients who perhaps don't feel they can afford a big TV campaign is a great way to test and learn. I have seen it not used in the best possible way because what we all know is that every layer of targeting you put on top of something increases a cost. And I've recently worked with a client who wanted to reach a particular audience based in London and put all these different behaviors on top of it that actually became quite sizable. And I took a step back and I said, you do realize that you're speaking to most of the London TV audience now. You should probably just buy ITV London Macro. So a lot of the time it needs to be used correctly. YouTube, if I was being a bit cynical, where I don't think it's used correctly a lot of the time, it tends to be an archive for creatives to house long TV ads that they can't get on air. So they want to do a shoot and they want to do a nice 3-minute epic. Now, a lot of the time, I think that does work. It works really well for John Lewis. It worked well in a previous agency I worked with, Lexus, who would show a kind of 5-minute piece of content about the filming of the ad and behind the scenes. I think it's great for that type of thing. But a lot of the time, advertisers want their TV ads on YouTube because they use it. They're of the right demographic. A marketing director is sort of, early 40s and therefore is used to YouTube, feels it's the future, feels it's where eyeballs are going. And to some extent, she or he would be right in saying that. Social video, now Nikita will know that this isn't all brands advertising on there, but obviously e-commerce brands see particular successes using social video because you get that direct to purchase accountability, which you can't get quite so easily in the other platforms. Now, of course, my challenge as an agency, media agency person, is to ensure that we can get them off of that way of being hooked. So sometimes what happens is a client sort of runs out of road if they're at the bottom of the funnel of Facebook. and they'll need to go into more broadcast channels. And it's basically winning off the fact that you're not going to put an ad on linear TV and get an instant sale like you've seen in Facebook. They're doing different things. So our challenge is to understand what types of TV advertising are doing what and the role of them. Now, finally, if programmatic VOD, large agencies sell these as what's called a non-disclosed bundle, so they can deliver a lower blended price. So a lot of the time they'll say, we're going to reach 16 to 24-year-old men using VOD, and there'll be an element of broadcaster VOD, but there'll also be inventory that we access from exchanges. Now, you need to be responsible and make sure that you've got a good amount of that clear cast quality broadcast content, and that can be where agencies can be a little bit sneaky by actually not putting the right quality inventory in alongside that. But those are the 6 lenses, and we have to look at all of these different types of inventory all the time. And the thing is, when it comes to being a media agency, my background, I've run buying agencies, I've run planning agencies, and I've worked in creative agencies. My craft skill is as a media planner and strategist. So my role is to always think about the viewer. And all this technology is great that's coming up. It's kept money in the market. It keeps it moving. It allows us to keep audiences engaged. This is still the largest leisure activity in this country, is watching TV in whatever format you want to call it. But I do find that one of the things that we have forgotten is the viewer. And that's what I want to talk about now, the long forgotten viewer. And I feel that it was Jeff Goldblum who said it best in Jurassic Park, where he said, you were so preoccupied with whether or not you could, you didn't stop to think if you should. And why am I saying that? I'm saying that because we have the opportunity to ad serve, we have the opportunity to do addressable, to interrupt flow, we have the opportunity to product place, etc. But we must always consider the viewer experience first and foremost. Now, I haven't got time to go through, and these are my last couple of slides, all the different opportunities that exist and the different types of viewer experience, but here are some examples of how it varies so massively. So let's take Sky's VOD product. Sky is quite unique in the fact that, and they haven't done this deliberately, the fact that if you buy Sky VOD, you're going to be pretty much 90% on big screen. And that's because most people access Sky VOD not through a mobile phone or Chromecasting or laptops plugged into TVs. They do it through their Sky Q box. So it's a big sit back, large screen TV viewing experience. So obviously, if you buy that in the right way, it can actually be bought better than addressable. Have a look at this. So this is Metro. Now this is a quality placement, okay? And this is a premium placement, but even this shows that we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 different ads on this one page. And actually the video ad in the bottom right here from the Army is loading on top of the ads. So what is that experience? Now, I'm not saying that's a bad advertising experience for the consumer, but you've got to understand that I'm hoping the Army have placed that ad there because they've got something on air generating a brand awareness, and then this is the last click to kind of sweep up that demand. We've got to be thinking about how our audiences are receiving these videos and in what context. And that's why my last slide is going to talk about YouTube and how it is different. So just look at the variety of products YouTube has and how different the experience can be. So first of all, and I hope I've got my uniques right here, Justin, but you know, the masthead alone can reach 15 million people. It's sizable. There isn't really anything else in the market that can do that. The bumpers, actually, from a VOD point of view, as a media agency, extremely cost effective, one of the cheapest things around. True Views, I'm a particular fan of for categories that really have limited interest. And so they're called skippables by punters. They're truly permission-based. We know that when we're buying that and we're paying for it, we're only going to pay for people who actually want to see the ad and they haven't skipped it. And then we always seem to forget that YouTube is actually the second biggest search engine. So if someone's going to search for how to cook a steak, this is where you can get content in front of someone because they're in that seeking mindset. So here you've got, just in YouTube, 4 different types of experience and viewer behavior that's going on. So not all eyeballs are the same. And with all of that, not all eyeballs cost the same either. Now these costs, buyer beware here, these are merely comparative costs that I've taken down to an adult level. But just to show you, this is the challenge of the modern media agency, is to be able to know, what are those eyeballs? What are those people doing? Have I got permission? And what's the cost? Because ultimately we're trying to drive business. And that's what I love about this industry. It's this wonderful hybrid of artistry and data. So we must be right and left brain in equal measure in everything that we do.
Thanks, Pete. That's an amazing roundup. And again, the theme about art and technology coming together, art and science. I think that's been the theme for tonight. But for now, I hope you found the last hour enjoyable, informative. Thanks to the panel once again, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks very much.